Nebraska has produced some pretty good wide receivers over the last few years. You had guys such as Stanley Morgan, J.D. Spielman, Wan'Dale Robinson, and most recently Trey Palmer, but mixed in between a few of those guys, the subject of today's video was expected to be the next great Huskers receiver. He was really highly recruited out of high school, as he was actually rated as the #1 wide receiver, and someone who could come in and fix Nebraska's problems right away. What's crazy though, is he has a really wild story. He's been committed to 4 different schools over the last few years, had a pretty disappointing career at Nebraska, and is now searching for a new home. In today's video, I want to talk about Alante Brown. Brown was the #1 player in his state, and a projected NFL pick down the road. We're going to go through his crazy recruitment, which included 4 different schools, talk about why things haven't worked out for him so far, and what I think is going to happen to him next. Before we get started though, be sure to leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new and love college football content, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now, let's get started and talk about Alante Brown. Going back in time, Alante was born in East Lansing, Michigan, and unfortunately, he'd grow up in a single house. They'd end up moving to Illinois after his dad was unfortunately locked away, and Brown said, quote, "I was so little, I don't remember a lot. My dad got locked up when I was only a few days old. Honestly, this is extremely tough, and I can't even imagine what that's like, and I'm definitely sorry it happened to him, and it's great that he's become extremely successful since then." He'd eventually arrive at Simeon Academy, which is better known for producing basketball talent as opposed to football talent, but his coach saw that he had a future. He was apparently a raw young quarterback with a lot to learn. His coach said, quote, "His quarterback ability wasn't where it needed to be. I grabbed him, took him under my wing, and we focused on that part of it. As far as leadership, he was a leader when he got here." Alante would end up saying at his first day at Simeon that one day he wanted to play for Michigan State. It apparently was his dream since he was a little kid, as his dad was obviously from there, and it would have been a homecoming-like event for him. He ended up gaining multiple offers, at first mostly from MAC schools. He decided to end up committing to one of them, as he verbally committed to Miami of Ohio, saying, quote, "I was able to see everything that Miami had to offer, as they offer a great education and overall strong academics. The football program is heading in the right direction, plus they already have a younger team." Eventually though, better offers would come in, and this had to make him think. Schools such as Minnesota, Illinois, and Purdue wanted him, and then the big one came. He was only a Red Hawk for a couple of months, as he decided to reopen his recruitment to play at his dream school. That big phone call would end up coming, as Mark D'Antonio would call him on June 26th, and his dream became a reality. His high school coach said, quote, "When D'Antonio called me and let me know they're going to offer him, I was emotional. I knew this is what he wanted." Pretty quickly, Alante committed to Michigan State and joined a group of pretty talented players. He was super confident in his ability to play there, as he said, quote, "I want to play receiver at Michigan State, and I've been compared to Keyshawn Martin and RJ Shelton. I know I'm a speedy guy, and I make plays, and I make unbelievable plays. I'm going to make a guy miss in a heartbeat kind of player, and I won't get caught in the open field." But unfortunately, a few months later, this would change. He wouldn't end up signing during the early signing period, and some speculators because of grades, but ultimately, it was that his receivers coach had now switched. Both the defensive backs and receivers coach ended up switching positions, and Alante wanted to play for him, so that was the nail in the coffin for his Michigan State commitment. He said it was still his dream school, but would end up reopening his recruitment. This was definitely tough for him, but he quickly released a new top 5, which was Florida State, Pitt, Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Tennessee, and ultimately it really seemed to come down to Florida State and Texas Tech. He eventually decided to commit to Matt Wells and Texas Tech, and this was a huge get for the Red Raiders. As a 3-year starter at quarterback for the Wolverines, he led his team to a city championship, a trip to the Class 7A state quarterfinals, and an 11-1 record. His numbers, though, were pretty great. He threw for 41 touchdowns and had 12 more scores on the ground, which led to all-state honors and a lot of recognition in the Windy City. He was apparently judged to be the best football player in the city of Chicago, which has 9 million people in its metro area. That's honestly pretty meaningful and a super big deal. He said, quote, "You know Chicago's not very known for football, but having that title as the city's best player, I took it to heart. I want to be the best player to come out of Chicago, and just having that mentality is an extra push and extra motivation." But once again, for the 3rd time, things would change. He decided to reopen his recruitment in August of 2019 and would go play a year of prep school at St. Thomas More Prep in Connecticut. He'd also officially make the switch to wide receiver and committed to getting better at that position. After that, he was listed as the #1 wide receiver in the prep school world, and he ended up taking official visits to Maryland and Ole Miss. He ultimately committed to Nebraska and would sign his letter of intent there, and this had the Cornhuskers buzzing. This was a huge get for them, and he was going to be an impactful player for them. According to 24/7 Sports, he was a 4-star recruit, the #1 wide receiver, and the #1 prep player in the class of 2020. There may not be as many of them, but that was still a huge honor, and how would this former quarterback do what now would be his 4th different college he thought he'd be going to? Let's take a look. Going into the 2020 season for Nebraska, combining Alante Brown and Wan'Dale Robinson, the Husker staff and fans felt they had a pretty terrific group of wideout. In 2020, he would waste little time making people take notice as he arrived on campus as a true freshman. One of the coaches said, quote, "On one of the first times running a route, he caught the ball as a target and took it to the house for a touchdown. I think Alante turned many eyes that day, and when he goes full speed, I don't think anyone can stop him." They also brought in Omar Manning, who was a really highly recruited JUCO player, but he didn't really pan out either. Just like Manning though, Brown's career didn't go like he probably thought it would have. In 2020, he'd appear in 2 games, catching 3 total passes. In 2021, he'd once again appear in 3 games, catching 3 total passes. Through his first 2 seasons there, he had 6 combined scores. This was extremely disappointing, but I guess there was a reason for it. He said, quote, "My freshman year and sophomore year, I had injuries on both shoulders." You can also blame the fact that Nebraska had a ton of offensive problems under Scott Frost, and it was definitely kind of a dumpster fire while he was there. 2022 would end up being no different, as we all know, they ended up losing to a horrible Northwestern team and then got beat by Georgia Southern at home. Still though, he'd have to fight to get on the field, as guys like Omar Manning, Xavier Betts, Oliver Martin, and Trey Palmer were all battling for playing time. Honestly, it was good that Nebraska had a lot of competition. He'd end up catching 3 passes for 32 yards against Northwestern, and then 2 weeks later in that loss to Georgia Southern had 3 catches again. From there though, he would just play very sparingly, as he never caught more than 2 passes in a game, and was definitely just a reserve player. He ended up playing in 9 of the team's games, finishing with 16 catches for 191 yards and 0 touchdowns. Unfortunately, through 3 years, he had yet to caught a touchdown pass. He had gone down as a pretty big disappointment in the eyes of Nebraska's fans, and now he is looking for a new home. Most recently, he decided to enter the transfer portal, and I believe he'll have 2 years of eligibility left. Throughout his career so far, he's got a total of 22 catches for 262 yards, and also spent some time as a kick returner. He ended up fielding 16 kicks for 284 yards. Overall, I think there are plenty of schools that'll take him. While I don't think he'll end up going to another Power 5 school, I could see a world in which maybe Northwestern or Illinois give him a chance, and at minimum, he can go down a level and become a feature player. When you're someone that can play both special teams and receiver, that's going to give you a leg up, and with him being so versatile, I assume there'll be some sort of coach that offers him. I remember reading a lot of hype about Alante a couple of years ago, and I wanted to see him pan out at Nebraska, but unfortunately, it looks like it wasn't a great fit, and neither was Matt Rule and the new staff, as he has now decided to enter the portal. What's crazy is he was the #1 prep receiver in the country, and at one point was probably figured to be a star at the college level. I thought his story was pretty awesome and pretty insane, and let's root for him at the next stage. Again, I really don't know how this video is going to do. It was just sort of a spur of the moment thing I decided to make, so let's hope it does well, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, let me know your thoughts down below, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.